Good evening all. My name's John Williams. I'm the Pro Vice Chancellor of Research Operations and the Dean of the Graduate Studies. I'd like to commence by acknowledging the Kaurna people, the original custodians on the land upon which the university's campuses at North Terrace, Waite and Roseworthy are built. I'm delighted to welcome you all to this special 3-minute thesis event. The 3-minute thesis is a national competition, but it's become an important annual event for the University of Adelaide's calendar and part of our Research Tuesday series. The concept was first developed by the University of Queensland back in 2008 and has been adopted by more than 350 universities across more than 18 countries. The ability to communicate research impact is a skill that all our researchers must develop, and the 3-minute thesis is a wonderful chance for our researchers to develop those skills. And for us, an audience, it's a great chance to hear some of the future research stars. In the time for which we could boil an egg, these people can distill years of research into a digestible form. Dozens of research students in each of the faculties have been vying for the places in these finals. And tonight we will hear from the best 10, our next generation of researchers. The winner will compete in the Trans-Tasman Finals, which will be held later this month at the University of Queensland. But before we begin, I'd like to invite our Vice-Chancellor, Professor Warren Bebbington, to say a few words. Vice-Chancellor.
Thank you, John, and good evening, everyone. I really enjoy this event. I come every year because I think it's one of the most important things we do for our postgraduate students. The ability to speak clearly and concisely about complex matters, to be able to talk to a journalist, to speak on radio, on television, to write for the general public in the newspaper. These are precious and vital skills for a PhD graduate. We're blessed on campus with a number of outstanding researchers who are marvellously good at this. But we also, of course, have plenty amongst us who become so immersed in the complexity of what they do, they find it very, very challenging to explain to the intelligent lay man or woman just what it is that's important about their work. But once you finish your PhD, those who can do this well will be the first to obtain grants, work, partners in business and industry, and success, which is what we would wish on all of our PhD graduates. So I always enjoy hearing the best of our young PhD communicators. I'd like to wish them all the very best of luck for tonight, and I'd particularly like to thank our panel of judges, who John will introduce shortly, who've given up their time tonight to do this, and hope you enjoy this as much as I do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice-Chancellor. Now, before we begin, I'd like to talk through the competition rules and the judging criteria, and then I'll introduce our judges. So here are some very simple but very challenging rules that our students must follow in the 3-minute thesis competition. So I'll walk you through them. Firstly, and this is the toughest one, a single static PowerPoint slide is permitted. No slide transitions, animation, movement or any description. A slide is to be presented from the beginning of the oration. No electronic media, other sounds or videos are permitted. No additional props or costumes and musical instruments. Laboratory equipment are permitted. The presentation are limited to 3 minutes maximum, and the competitors exceeding 3 minutes are disqualified. Now you can tell the next of these rules came in obviously because somebody tried them. So no poems, raps or songs. You must commence from the stage. The presentations are considered to have commenced when the presenter starts the presentation, and the decision of our esteemed panel is final. So the judging criteria: communication style. Was the thesis topic and its significance communicated in a language appropriate to an intelligent but non-specialist audience? That would be you. It has to be comprehension and also has to be engaging. You can see the rules there. So now it's time to introduce our panel. So I'll ask each of our judges to stand and be acknowledged. So first is Dr. Don Russell, the Chief Executive of the Department of State Development. The department Now, the department focuses on the creation of jobs and economic growth in the state's industry, business and community. Dr. Russell holds a PhD from the London School of Economics and has held various senior government roles, including as acting as Australia's ambassador to the United States and was principal advisor to Prime Minister Keating. Our second judge, thank you very much, our second judge is Dr. Leanna Reid, who is the Chief Scientist of South Australia. She is a renowned biotechnological expert and brings a wealth of experience to boards and investment experience in technology-based businesses. By training, good doctor is a pharmacologist, and she has published over 90 scientific papers and has a number of successful research and commercial ventures. And she currently chairs the Cooperative Research Centre for Cell Therapy and Manufacturing. Lachlan Parker is the Deputy Director of Media and Corporate Relations at the University. Now, before he spent a decade as a media manager for the state government, including as a senior media advisor for the Premier Mike Rann, and before that, the current Premier when he was a minister. He worked for 10 years in the ABC TV and radio, a reporter, including periods on my favourite shows, AM, PM and The World Today. From an academic point of view, he tells us that he had a misspent first year, starting biochemistry degree. He then went on to complete degrees in journalism and communications in Canada as well as Australia. Our final judge is Chiara Becciametti, who's the Deputy Director, is the Director of the University's Adelaide Enterprise, a unit responsible for accelerating innovation and commercialisation of our research. And she's had more than 20 years' experience in technology, commercialisation, finance, new business creation in Australia and the United States. Chiara has worked in the biotech industry and is a specialist in having started her career as a molecular biologist before moving into regulatory and marketing roles. And she has a real passion for both science and business and finding opportunities. So would you please thank our judges. The judging panel will choose one winner to carry on to the national finals in Queensland. The winner will receive $2,000 research travel fund plus free travel and accommodation to the national finals. I'd like to now say something about the People's Choice. Tonight you'll be given an opportunity to choose a winner with your vote in the People's Choice Award. On arrival, you should have received a voting form, so please save these till later and we will provide you with information on how to vote. The winner of the People's Choice Award will receive a $1,000 travel research grant. And if you require a form, please let one of our staff know and I'll re-announce that at a later stage. So, house rules. Mobile phones should be switched off or silent until the voting begins. Stay seated until the presenter has completed their 3-minute presentation. No flash photography during the talks. I will now introduce each contestant in turn. They will start speaking and their time will start when they get to their place and commence. So for that reason, let's save our applause till after the event. So our first presenter is Frances Williams from the School of Chemical Engineering, and her topic is Sustainable Water Treatment in Developing Countries. Frances.
We cannot survive without water. This is very easy to forget when clean water comes out of every tap. But for 336 million people, about 30 times the population of Australia, this is not the case. And contaminated water directly contributes to the deaths of 1,000 children every day. That's children under 5 years old. Chlorine is very efficient at killing bacteria, but there are many regions, especially in the tropics and the subtropics, where it's underused, misused, or too expensive. Moringa oleifera is a tree that grows in these regions. Its seeds contain a small protein that kills bacteria and clarifies cloudy water. The seeds are cheap, plentiful, and already used in local foods and traditional medicines. The seed powder kills a range of bacteria, including cholera and typhoid, and is already used in water treatment in rural Sudan. Preparing the seeds is a labour-intensive process, and the seed particles cannot be reused. And they quickly break down, leaving an unpleasant taste to the water. My research has focused on isolating the moringa protein and attaching it to sand, which is commonly used to filter solids from drinking water. This moringa functionalised sand not only filters solids, but also attracts and kills bacteria as the water passes through. This attachment prevents any further attachment of bacteria. So the second part of my research was to develop a method of removing this dead bacteria without separating the protein from the sand. Like with most things, the simplest solutions are often the best. When my sand becomes dirty, I wash it with a detergent. This causes the bacteria to separate from the protein. And if the detergent is non-ionic, uncharged, the protein stays attached to the sand. The detergent I'm using is fully biodegradable, making this a sustainable and eco-conscious method of water treatment. It's a simple solution to a significant problem because it means somebody with access to sand, moringa seeds, and water can actively purify their own water supply. Sorry, and detergent, I should say, not water. It can be used on any scale by a farmer in a remote village, or here in Adelaide, by you. It can even be retrofitted to existing sand filters, like those used during the last stages of wastewater treatment, before the water is released to the environment. With some more tests and large-scale studies, my research is the first step towards a new way of treating water for the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frances. I think we may have a question from one of our judges.
Thank you, Frances. The question is around where you see your research going long term. Would you envision seeing new markets for the natural products, or would you see an industry that would look at synthetic molecules that you would take forward?
Well, very good question. It could be used for both. There's quite a big area of need in the developing world, in the countries I mentioned, which could just use the seeds from the tree. However, a very interesting article was published a while ago from a group in Switzerland who can produce this protein using E. coli. So that actually removes the need to use the tree at all, and means that, you know, us in a lab here, we could be producing this protein, attaching it to sand or something similar to sand, and using that maybe to reduce the load of chlorine in water, or to replace other kind of water treatment mechanisms. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we thank Frances? Our second presenter is Isabella van Siebel from the School of Medicine, and her topic is As If Cancer Wasn't Shitty Enough.
For a long time, there weren't many good treatments for cancer. But over the past few years, there has been an explosion of new treatments called targeted therapies, named such because they attack specific markers found on cancer cells. However, many of these new treatments have come with their own set of problems that are especially awful, including diarrhea, incontinence, pain, and ulceration. Think about the last time you had an ulcer in your mouth and how painful it was. You couldn't eat. Sometimes it even hurt to talk. Now imagine you have one really big ulcer that runs the entire length of your gastrointestinal tract, from your mouth to your bum. And imagine how painful that would be. Ulcers in the intestine can also cause diarrhea that is so bad that it renders patients housebound and interferes with their day-to-day activities. It completely ruins people's lives. Patients say to their cancer specialist, I'm grateful that you saved my life, but now I want my life back. And what's bad is that they are the lucky ones. If these side effects get bad enough, which they do in 75% of patients that get them, they will be hospitalised for weeks, unable to get out of their hospital bed to go to the toilet, unable to eat and getting their nutrition through a tube straight into their veins. And of those patients that are hospitalised, 5% of them will die. And they're not dying from the cancer, they're dying from the cancer treatment. So why is this happening? Because while the way we treat cancer has changed, the way we deal with the side effects hasn't kept pace. These new cancer treatments called targeted therapies work in a very different way to old cancer treatments, but we're still treating the side effects in the same way. However, I've been working very hard to try and change that. My research has uncovered that the way we are treating these side effects is completely wrong, because the mechanisms that are causing them are distinctly different to the old cancer treatments. Through careful analysis, I discovered that targeted therapies are causing ulceration and complete obliteration of certain distinct parts of the intestine, meaning that patients get debilitating diarrhoea. They also cause the gut to become leaky, like in this picture, meaning that instead of our gut tightly regulating what we let into the blood, things like nasty bugs are getting through and causing lethal infections. So what does my research all mean for the patient I described who hasn't left his hospital bed in weeks and is in tremendous pain? It means that we are one step closer to curing him of his unbearable side effects, because now we know what's actually causing them, we can start to try and treat them. So we can not only save his life, but also give him his life back.
Very nice presentation.
Thank you.
In terms of how you would treat this, how would you get over that? What are your plans for that? Have you been looking at that in your research, or is that something still to come?
Thanks for the question, Leanna. So, and a very good question. This research is really exciting because it enables us to really focus our treatment. At the moment, the treatment is anti-motility or anti-secretory, and there's really minimal evidence to suggest that these are mechanisms that are causing diarrhoea. Therefore, patients are experiencing side effects from those drugs as well. So by knowing the mechanisms, we can really refine our research and our treatments into what's actually causing the problem.
Thank you. Let's thank Isabella. So our third presenter tonight is Rachel Bills from the School of Architecture and the Built Environment. And her topic is Some Like It Cold, Thermal Comfort Amongst Older Australians. Thank you, Rachel.
On a recent trip to the UK, I was told by more than one individual that they'd never been as cold in their life as they were inside the houses of Australia during winter. How on earth, they asked, do we survive in drafty houses with no central heating without dropping dead of hypothermia? The reality is that actually Australians do drop dead of hypothermia and other cold-related illnesses at much higher rates than you might expect. Higher, in fact, than Sweden or Canada or the USA. And one of the big problems is ageing. Yes, that's right, the old and decrepit are falling down, placing huge strains on our health and welfare systems. And I refer, of course, to our increasing population of older houses. I'm certainly not referring to my friend Doris here as a problem. However, increasingly people like Doris are living in these old decrepit houses, which are hot in summer and cold in winter. So we know how the Brits feel about these houses. But what does Doris think? So my research focused on asking Doris exactly that. How do you feel? Would you prefer to feel warmer or cooler? At the same time, I measured the temperatures in Doris's house so I could compare the thermal conditions with her perception of thermal comfort. And I discovered some quite interesting things. In winter, those conditions found so abhorrent by the POMs were no problem for Doris. In fact, at temperatures as low as 12 degrees, Doris said that she was perfectly comfortable and had no desire to feel any warmer. However, in summer, at temperatures relatively mild, between 22 and 24 degrees, Doris complained of feeling too hot and wanted to be cooler. So overall, what we see is that older people are preferring and are comfortable in cooler temperatures than we would expect to see in a younger population. So does it really matter if Doris likes her house a bit cold? The short answer is yes, because those cold-related deaths and illnesses I spoke of earlier are far more prevalent amongst the older population. Colder temperatures are also associated with an increase in falls. And falls can be fatal in themselves, but they are also often a trigger for entry into a nursing home. So what I'm aiming to find is that sweet spot, that range of conditions where Doris is both comfortable, but also not at risk of serious health problems. I want to take her old decrepit house and design a haven for her golden years, because I believe Doris, and all older people, deserve that. Don't you?
Hi, Rachel. Thanks for that. As a Canadian, having moved to Australia, I couldn't agree with your opening statement more. Do you see this research moving towards retrofitting houses to do with construction guidelines or to do with what extra things we might give people in their homes?
I'd like to think it's a bit of all three. I'd like to see some policy towards housing improvement programs, because we've seen them work in terms of health improvement in the UK and in New Zealand. I'd also like to see some guidelines into the building code to make sure that houses are warmer than they are currently, because whilst there are energy efficiency guidelines in those building codes, there's no actual comfort requirements. And for me, this whole project is about housing performance and housing improvement almost as a preventative healthcare measure.
Well done, Rachel. So our fourth presenter is Amy Ionella from the School of Biological Sciences, and her topic is a furry fatality.
Crawling forward on my belly. Crawling forward on my belly, I breathe in a deep whiff. The loamy scent of soil is tainted with the sweet, stomach-churning odour of death. I shine my torch through the tunnel, and there she is. White belly fur upturned, rabbit number 3337. Kneeling down, I collect a sample of liver for analysis to confirm the killer. Our prime suspect, the rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus, codename RHDV. And so begins the murder mystery that is my PhD. But this is a twist. In this story, I'm rooting for the serial killer. To explain, I'll introduce you to our victim. Rabbits were brought to Australia for hunting by Europeans 150 odd years ago. The trouble is, they eat a lot. And I'm sure you all know the phrase, breed like rabbits. Soon plagues of rabbits were eating our crops and pastures, which now cost us over $200 million every year. What's more difficult to quantify is the cost to our environment. Rabbits like eating the seedlings of some of our native plants so much that they're driving them extinct. This is where we get to our killer. RHDV was introduced 20 years ago to help keep a lid on rabbit numbers and the destruction they cause. At first, it did a really good job, but more recently we've seen a resurgence in rabbit numbers. It seems that the rabbits are evolving, becoming resistant to the original virus. The good news is that RNA-based viruses like RHDV are also renowned for their extremely fast rate of evolution. What I'm trying to discover is how RHDV is faring in this evolutionary arms race. To do this, I've been studying the virus's accomplice, the blowfly. Blowflies are the getaway vehicle in this scenario. When RHDV makes a kill, it leaves behind a carcass at the scene, a carcass that is loaded with virus particles. To the flies, these carcasses are like the best bar in town. Good food attracts all the girls, and the guys come along to check them out. When the flies have had their fun, they move on, blown away by the wind, carrying the virus with them to the next unsuspecting rabbit population. What I've been able to do is catch these flies and sequence the RNA of the virus that they carry to determine how many virus strains are circulating, whether they're all in the same place at the same time, and which strains are the most effective in causing outbreaks of disease among rabbits. Even better, I found that by targeting flies to do this, we can detect the virus far more reliably and in a fraction of the effort of the old way, which involved hours of searching for rabbit carcasses. With this new surveillance technique, we can discover the best rabbit-killing virus to be our champion for the years to come.
Well, thank you for that. It's a very important Australian issue. I think we've all been brought up on myxomatosis and been intrigued by that. But I'm just curious, with research like this, are there obvious funding sources? Is this something that commercially a private company would be attracted to funding, or is it just by its very nature something that has to be funded out of the public purse?
You're referring to the research that I'm doing?
Yes.
I have been lucky enough to get funding from the Foundation for Rabbit Free Australia to do this research. And so they're a charity organisation. So there's a lot of funding that comes through from interested landholders and also from our agricultural industry, because it does impact them so much. But also a lot of it does come from the public purse as well, which is part of why I like to get the research back out there into the public.
So now we're up to our fifth presenter, Katerina Richter, who is from the School of Medicine, and her topic is Bug Wars Battlefront Biofilms. Thank you, Katerina.
Thank you. Let me ask you a question. When was the last time you took antibiotics? Did they work? I'm sure you've all heard about the rise of the superbugs, meaning more and more bacteria like golden staph become resistant to antibiotics. It is predicted that in the near future, 10 million people will die each year due to antibiotic resistance, which is more than people dying from cancer and diabetes combined. The stormtroopers of life-threatening diseases are fighting against our most powerful weapons. It's a battle against bacteria, and every one of us has to face this fight. One reason why bacteria become resistant is they live in biofilms. Biofilms are clusters of bacteria embedded in a self-produced slime, as you can see in the left picture. Biofilms act like an armor to protect bacteria from the immune system and to survive medical treatments. On top of that, bacteria in biofilms easily become resistant to antibiotics, hence our best medicine does not work anymore. Due to the spread of antibiotic resistance, millions of people suffer and die from devastating and recurring biofilm infections like non-healing wounds or life-threatening lung and heart diseases. Novel treatments are urgently needed and research has to strike back. Resistance isn't futile. We just need to know our enemy better. I identified bacterial nutrient pathways as targets, which are essential for bacterial growth and disease. Based on this observation, I used established biofilm models to investigate the anti-biofilm activity of two compounds that are not antibiotics. The first compound depletes nutrients from bacteria, making them hungry, grumpy, and vulnerable, while the second compound kills them. My studies showed no toxicity and significant anti-biofilm activity of my novel treatment against golden staph. 99.9% of biofilm was killed after treatment exposure, exceeding the antibiotic with 94% biofilm killing. Based on these promising results, I'm currently optimizing the treatment for the first clinical trial in Adelaide. The two compounds will be delivered in a wound healing gel that is locally applied at the site of infection. This will complement the gel's wound healing properties with anti-biofilm activity, reduce side effects, and fight biofilms efficiently. I hope that my research will give us new power to fight the dark side of biofilms. May the force be with us.
It's fantastic and very important work, Amy. Could you tell us what the your compounds that you're using to fight the biofilm, Do they survive if you take them orally, for example? Do they get across the gut? So what's the scope of applicability? Is it just on surface type applications, or can they get across biological membranes so that they could work systemically?
Yeah, very good question. We use those two compounds directly at the site of infection, so the local application is very crucial for that. They won't survive the gastrointestinal tract, so they would be destroyed if they enter the stomach because of enzymes and acidic conditions, so they wouldn't cause any help over there. But if we apply those compounds directly where the infection is, that means where it's supposed to go, the treatment will be much, much more efficient. Plus, we don't have a systemic effect, so we don't have any kind of side effects throughout the entire body. And we increase the concentration of the compounds directly where they are needed. So hopefully it's working out.
Our sixth presenter is Karen Rogers from the School of Linguistics, and her topic is Religion, Rhetoric, Retribution, Persuasive Voices in the Public Sphere.
You are all going to hell. So now is the time to confess your sins, repent of your wrongdoing, and realise that you are a decrepit, worthless blight on the face of God's good earth. Statements like this show how the interpretation of ancient texts, particularly sacred ones, is a persuasive path upon which many a clumsy foot has trodden. Attempts to decipher the Bible and the meaning of it have caused over 2,000 years of misunderstandings, mayhem, and megalomania, most of which can be summarised as interpretational differences or not considering what might have been lost in translation. In my thesis, I analysed the persuasive structures within the biblical Hebrew text of the Old Testament book of Isaiah at micro, macro, and metalinguistic levels. My unique study decodes the persuasive rhetoric of religious scripts and identifies correlations in modern settings, particularly in regard to power, gender, and equality. My work is the first of its kind to formally recognise how religious rhetoric shapes experiences and creates parameters for right ways to live beyond religious communities. Jesus knew there was a place for everything, and it's not necessarily everyone's place to come to Australia, said Tony Abbott in 2010. This use of the term Jesus here is somewhat typical of Christian usage in the public sphere. These authoritative terms, character references, Bible verses, and use of original languages are intended to establish the speaker's righteous authority. Cue Danny Nalia with "The Lord spoke to me in a dream." Cue Scott Morrison with "Having been exposed to hatred and bigotry for the views I've taken." Cue Tony Abbott's description of his own lecture as Cabinet's "come to Jesus" moment. Religion, particularly Christianity, is still engaged rhetorically to define one's standing, values, and lifestyle choices through advertising, communications, politics, and social media. So social media and the pulpit are now both forums for preaching, and in both forums, there is a switching of language use for authority, with preachers switching between English, Christianese, that is the jargon, and select Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek words from the ancient biblical texts, though not always with an understanding of how to do so. So, online conservative Christians can come across like the drunk uncle you avoid at family functions, who stands too close and parades their ideologies without fact checks and education in the field. Biblical rhetoric girds a self-made confidence to charade as an authority through spouting phrases like, "The Lord has called me to touch people," and "God hates fags." Religious rhetoric is a persuasive voice that still says, "Buy what I'm selling, whatever I'm selling, or there'll be consequences."
Thanks for that, Karen. I think there's been much more of a presence of this sort of language in American politics than in Australia. Do you think it's on the rise or on the decrease in Australia?
I think a lot of the sort of Christian rhetoric comes through in subversive rhetorical undercurrents in Australian politics. So you see it harbouring in things like the plebiscite and how not necessarily closet Christians, but quiet Christians approach their faith, and it comes out very loudly with aspects like that in politics. So thank you.
And now we come to our seventh presenter, Daniel Murnane from the School of Physical Science, and his topic, A Most Natural Universe.
In the particle collider at CERN, we've reached an unprecedented level of precision and understanding of the subatomic world. And it's a strange place with quantum weirdness and a zoo of 17 unique particles that describe almost everything that we see and experience in the universe. The discovery of the Higgs particle is the final piece of that puzzle that we call the standard model of particle physics. And it's the Higgs that gives the whole theory its mass. But the Higgs is notorious for being extremely unnatural. So imagine if you took a glass of wine and put it in the middle of a table with some kids running around. You could expect it off or leave it untouched, but you wouldn't expect to come back and find it teetering perfectly on the edge. But when we looked with the collider, we found the Higgs mass teetering perfectly on the edge of the narrowest table ever made, and the violent conditions of the Big Bang hadn't knocked it off. That's extremely unnatural, right? But the Higgs is unusual in other ways. CERN produces these Higgs particles, and when they die and break apart, we piece through the bones to reconstruct their skeleton. And the Higgs is an animal we've never seen before. Basically, we think we've discovered a platypus. You see, everything that you can touch around you is made of matter particles, and you interact with them via force particles. The Higgs is a matter particle that behaves like a force particle. It's very strange. So this platypus has fur and lives in water and lays eggs, and nobody knows what the hell it's doing there. So perhaps we haven't discovered a platypus. Instead, I propose we've found a duck and a beaver stitched together. That's a more natural explanation, right? Since we've already seen plenty of ducks and beavers before. Now take that glass of wine and stick it on a much more wide table. In this duck-beaver scenario, my research shows that the glass isn't perched precariously anymore. It's stable. That's what I mean by a natural model. And I'm working to find the very best of these models. If the Higgs is made up of smaller particles, we get back a much more natural universe. Problem is, there's dozens of ways of combining these smaller particles, and each way has thousands of ways of fitting with the measured data. To solve this, I've taken our original problem of naturalness and used it as a way of measuring how believable each combination is. So I've worked out a general way of calculating the naturalness of any physical model, which I then teach to machine learning software. And this supercomputer quickly and efficiently hunts for natural models that describe the world around us. We live in an era of science where we're blessed with thousands of new theories that fit with measured data or could be made to fit. So I'm advocating a search for new physics with the condition that a model shouldn't need divine intervention to work properly. A measure of naturalness, like the one I've designed, will tell us where to cast our net in the huge ocean of valid new theories. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Daniel, for that. I'm just curious, do you think as humans we have an innate desire or need that things actually be stable and natural? I was sort of a bit intrigued by the previous contestants' need to bring religious certainty into everything. I'm just wondering, in the modern age, maybe research like this and the facilities that support it are our sort of modern cathedrals. So it's a bit disturbing if the modern cathedrals are convincing us that everything is unstable. I'm just wondering, are we innately biased towards stability and there is a reason why things exist?
Well, that's maybe not up to me to say. Maybe that's up to an evolutionary biologist. But yeah, I guess, there's two solutions, isn't there? There's either we do live in an unstable universe or an unpredictable universe, and then the only reason that we're here is the anthropological principle, which is that the only way we can be here is that the universe let us be here in order to be able to ask the question of why we are here. That's a solution, but that's not a very physical question, that's a metaphysical question. The best I think a physicist can do is say, assuming the universe has good reasons for why it is the way it is, what's the best way that we can describe it without, praying down in a cathedral and asking for divine intervention to make these sort of physical theories work properly. Yeah.
Our eighth presenter, Paula Zito from the Adelaide Law School, and her topic is food, origin, regionality, culture. Paula.
How many of you have bought food products that are labelled with regional names such as Adelaide Hills or Barossa Valley, assuming that the food has some connection with those named regions? Well, you are not alone. Regional branding involves branding food products with the names of regions that have a reputation for producing quality regional food and infuses food with elements of origin, regionality and culture that many consumers are willing to pay more for, assuming that regionally branded food is authentic regional food made using locally sourced ingredients and better quality than food that is branded on a country of origin basis such as made in Australia. However, the reality is that in many instances, regionally branded food has no connection with the name regions. I carried out original fieldwork in the South Australian regions of Barossa Valley and Adelaide Hills that disclosed a significant dissatisfaction among food producers and food industry representatives with current Australian laws dealing with regional branding. Current laws do not adequately govern whether there is an actual and real connection between food and origin before regional branding is attached to food. My fieldwork disclosed a real need for legal change in this area, which is where the next part of my research becomes particularly important. I evaluated the worthiness of using food geographical indications on food labels under a legal food geographical indication system, given that the central purpose of geographical indications is to legally protect and enforce the connection between goods and origin. In fact, Australia already has a wine geographical indication system that legally protects and regulates the connection between wine and origin. This is why we cannot call sparkling wine made in Australia champagne, because our sparkling wine has no connection with the French region Champagne, where champagne is made using locally sourced grapes, processes and methods. So why not have a similar legal system to protect the connection between Australian regional food and origin? Well, to answer that question, I carried out extensive fieldwork on food geographical indication systems in Italy, because Italy has been operating under such a system since 1992 and has the highest number of food geographical indication registrations in Europe. From my Italian fieldwork, I made observations on the costs, risks and benefits involved with the food geographical indication system. And in my research, I make recommendations on how such a system can be tailored to cater for Australia's national and international food trade and legal needs and obligations, as well as the elements required for an effective system. I recommend that a food geographical indication system would be an extremely worthwhile investment for Australian food industry and trade.
Thank you, that was wonderful.
Thanks,
Have
Sarah.
you looked at perceptions internationally of Australian foods and what the impact would be on international exports?
Well, more and more consumers are seeking out locally sourced food and wanting to know where food comes from. And from an international perspective, especially in Europe, they're already on top of geographical indications and the value that that can add to food. So there is quite a real interest and need in this area. There's currently international agreements being negotiated that deal with geographical indications, and I think that given some of our neighbouring countries that are particularly interested in food geographical indications, Australia does need to look at getting some new laws in place to bring this system into effect. Thanks, Kara.
And now our ninth presenter, Tanya Jain from the School of Biological Sciences and her topic, Fishing for a Cure for Alzheimer's Disease.
I'd like you to imagine you're in a room full of strangers. You feel anxious because you don't know anyone. Now imagine being told that those strangers are actually your close friends and family. You've simply forgotten them. It's a scary thought, isn't it? Unfortunately, this is reality for over 350,000 Australians who are currently living with dementia, most of whom have Alzheimer's disease. And even though Alzheimer's was first recognised as a disease over 100 years ago, and over 100,000 research articles have been published, we still do not have a clear understanding of the disease process. There have been hundreds of clinical trials of drugs designed to target the features of the Alzheimer brain depicted above. But of the few that made it through to testing on humans, all have failed to cure or effectively prevent disease progression. This repeated failure to treat Alzheimer's by targeting these disease features has led to much debate as to whether they should remain the focus of research efforts. So what can we do differently? Well, Alzheimer's disease can be caused by rare mutations, and a recent study showed that children who carry one of these mutations already have changes in their brains as young as 9 years old, even though these carriers will not typically exhibit Alzheimer's-like symptoms until decades later. But we cannot perform invasive surgeries or tests on children to examine their brains in detail. So how can we identify these early changes that ultimately lead to Alzheimer's disease decades later? Well, in our laboratory, we use zebrafish as a tool or model to study Alzheimer's disease. And yes, I know what you're all thinking, but wait, humans don't have scales or a tail, and fish aren't even mammals. And aren't fish cold-blooded? How can we possibly study human disease using fish? And while it's true that zebrafish do not resemble humans closely on the outside, when we look deeper, all the way down to the genetic level, we see that zebrafish are actually about 70% genetically similar to humans. So we use the latest in genome engineering technologies to engineer these Alzheimer's disease-causing mutations into the equivalent zebrafish gene. We have developed the world's first zebrafish models of these mutations. And when we look deep inside the brains of these fish, we see significant changes in brain function at very early ages. And interestingly, many of the changes we see are linked to problems associated with Alzheimer's disease, such as inflammation, sleep, and energy production. Zebrafish are an outstanding system for use in the discovery of drugs to treat human diseases. So our next step is to use our Alzheimer's fish to screen for drugs that can correct the changes we see. This research is helping us to understand the initial changes in brains that ultimately leads to Alzheimer's disease. A greater understanding of these early changes will open up new possibilities for the development of therapies aimed at preventing or delaying the onset of Alzheimer's disease. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's amazing how zebrafish are used, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
In so many different systems
Yeah.
and so forth. To what extent does the, I guess, the physiology of the condition that you can see in a zebrafish resemble the human situation you were saying about the similarities? So, I mean, for example, do you get amyloid plaques or anything developing when you've introduced mutations and so forth?
Yeah. We actually don't see amyloid plaques in the brains when we've looked. We don't actually really compare them physiologically as a physiological model. What we try to do is look at the genetics and look at what genes are changed in response to this mutation. And because genes obviously encode for proteins, so then what proteins are being changed, we can then find some chemical compounds or things that can, correct those changes and fix the problem, hopefully, at that level. Those zebrafish brains don't look exactly like a human brain. The processes within the brain are very comparable to a human brain, so we can use that and target that. Thanks.
And now for our final presenter, Catherine Radoslavich, from the School of Gender Studies and Social Analysis. And her topic, Under the Covers, Behind Closed Doors, Experiencing Intimacy in the Nursing Home.
Imagine yourself as a 72-year-old woman. Every Friday, your husband runs a romantic, intimate spa for the two of you to share. Now imagine your husband is diagnosed with dementia, has a sudden health catastrophe, and you have only weeks to place him in a nursing home. One thing's for sure, you won't be having any more romantic spas together. Indeed, after 12 months in care, you won't have even seen him without his shirt on. This isn't a hypothetical scenario. This was Ada and Alfie's reality. Australia's population is ageing, and it's challenging us to provide better later life care that meets not just our physical needs, but supports us to maintain our most significant relationships. As a society, we actively discredit the role of sexuality and intimacy in the lives of older people. Who here has cringed at the thought of their parents, let alone their grandparents, having sex? Who has giggled at an older couple holding hands, or sneered at a so-called dirty old man who dares to show an interest in later life sexuality? Against this backdrop of ageism, it is easy to create an aged care system which forgets to accommodate opportunities for sexual expression, intimacy, and the maintenance of our most significant relationships. This is where my research comes in. Before I began, almost all research looking at sexuality in nursing homes had focused on staff reactions to so-called problem behaviours. No one had asked older people themselves about how their most important relationships had changed once they were in care, and about what aged care providers could do to best support their needs. Over the course of 18 months, I interviewed 13 couples and 7 staff at 3 Adelaide nursing homes and asked them these very questions. By listening to the voices of older people, I discovered systemic challenges to the experience of privacy. As 62-year-old Jenny put it, you never get 2 uninterrupted hours together. Mabel would give her husband Clarence handjobs in the bathroom because in their mid-80s, that was the only place they felt guaranteed privacy. And meanwhile, Stanley and Ada explained to me how simple things like feeding their partner dinner became acts of intimacy when other opportunities for intimate expression were denied. Underlying this is a tension over ownership of space. The nursing home is both someone's home and someone else's workplace. So how do we determine who controls entry into a room or controls scheduling? By sharing these stories, I hope to change and challenge our perceptions of sexuality and intimacy in later life, and to help design an aged care system for the future, one which places supporting meaningful relationships at the centre of everything we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. So the question that I have is more around where the research could go from here as far as looking at elder people's autonomy and ability to really speak for themselves in these homes, and also the impact it will have on their quality of life if they are given that sort of autonomy and freedom. So if you can speak to that.
Yep, thanks, Kiara. So one of the big things that's come out of this is looking at the way we train staff in residential aged care. Within our education curriculums, including the Certificate 3 in aged care and our nursing curriculums, there's very little on sexuality in later life. So part of what's important is having an awareness that sexuality and intimacy across the gender spectrum exist in later life, but it's also empowering staff to be prepared to encounter these things in care and to respond to them, which in turn will help support older people to stand up and say, actually, my husband's here visiting at the moment. I don't want you to empty the bins. Can you come back in 2 hours? And create a system of acceptance where wanting time alone or time together is not a point for embarrassment. You're not going to be worried about people gossiping. It's accepted. But that does require empowerment of older people and of staff themselves to be prepared to respond to the situations they find on the floor.
Well, colleagues, that ends our presentation, and I think we should all probably come away from this thinking that the future looks bright. Can we all thank our presenters? I'll now ask our judges to withdraw and start their deliberations. And I'm hoping someone will take them where they're supposed to deliberate. Now, for the rest of us, I would like to make a reminder about the People's Choice. You all should now have your ballot papers and pens. If you don't, please put your hand up and one of our volunteers will come to you and provide you with a ballot. So in terms of using the ballot paper, please tick the box against your favourite presenter. Now remember the judging criteria which we're putting up now. We will also display a series of slides, their slides to remind you of what the presentations were. And once you've done that, volunteers will come and collect your ballots, and we'll have a short break during this time while we tally up the People's Choice and ballots. So please keep your hand up if you want a ballot paper, and in a moment's time we'll run through the slides and then we will collect your ballots. So please enjoy the break. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, judges. We now are clearly waiting to see what happened. So before we begin, I'd like to invite our contestants to come forward. And I'd ask the Vice-Chancellor to present all of them with a gift and a certificate of this achievement and a $100 gift voucher. And now it's time for the People's Choice Award, which will be announced by the Vice-Chancellor, and we have a cheque for $1,000 for that person. And best of luck at cashing this at the bank.
Won't work in the ATM, I don't think. So, the People's Choice Prize for 2016 goes to Katharina Richter.
And now, the 2016 3-minute thesis winner is, and I hand over to the Vice-Chancellor to give a cheque of $2,000.
And the 2016 winner of the University of Adelaide's 3-minute thesis competition is Frances Williams.
So I'll ask our wonderful contestants, I'll be back for photographs in a moment, but I'd like to say a few closing comments if I could. So congratulations once again to not just our winners, but all our wonderful presenters here tonight. It's wonderful to see such a variety of research going on at this university and hear directly from our students of their research. They did a fantastic job. Please thank them all. I'd like to thank our colleagues in black who run around and organise this event. This couldn't be put on. This is a smoothly run event, but there's a lot going on behind the scenes. So can we thank our colleagues who did the work? And thank you for being part of a very special event. And don't forget our Research Tuesdays resume in their normal next month. So please check out our Research Tuesdays and enjoy what I think is the research that this university is taking to the world. So thank you and good night.